Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in this afternoon for our chat with Natalie Jenner. We're so lucky to have her joining us from Canada. It's great for us to be able to do these Zoom chats. She doesn't have to be in the store, and we can talk to people all over the world.
I'd rather be in the store, trust me.
So a quick bio. Born in England and raised in Canada, Natalie Jenner graduated from the University of Toronto with degrees in English literature and law, and has worked for decades in the legal industry. The Jane Austen Society is her first novel. If you have any questions for Natalie, drop them in the comments section below, and John, who is lurking behind the scenes, will get them over to me for the second half of this chat. It's so nice to meet you, even virtually.
Hi, thanks so much, McKenna, for having me here today. It's a real thrill.
Oh, it's our pleasure, truly. We've had much love for your book at Murder by the Book since I got to read an early manuscript. Your editor, Keith, put it in my hands and said, "You've got to read this." And even though it's not a crime novel, it's just such a delight. And we're so happy to be featuring you in the Jane Austen Society today. Congratulations on being a USA Today and internationally best-selling author in 1 week. That's amazing.
Yeah, I'm still absorbing that. It's been basically every step of this publishing journey from the time I wrote the book to getting my agent, and then working with St. Martin's and having them acquire it and then roll it out has been like the writer's dream come true. And I am in my early 50s now, so I kind of feel like I earned that a bit. Make that part easy. Like, the journey getting there was kind of difficult, but it's been like a total dream. And then in Canada, on the weekend, hitting the Canadians, Canadian fiction bestseller list through our national newspaper, the Globe and Mail, which is my paper I grew up with for 40 years. So to then, make that list as well. And we came in, I think, at number 3. So it was
amazing,
mind blowing. And I mean, the bookstores in my town are still closed. One of them opened like a week ago after my book released. And through Herculean efforts, we got some signed copies over there because we're still in lockdown where I am. And so it's just been this incredible journey and so much positivity. And your mother and you being like literally 2 of the absolute earliest readers. So yeah. I was thrilled when I was asked if I would, speak with you today.
Yeah, I think my mom actually had a quote on the promotional and marketing materials really early on, but yeah, we're huge fans. We were huge fans of the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society years ago, and we're telling everyone this is perfect for fans of that because it has that same heartwarming feel, and you love the characters, and it's really a treat. So let's dive in. I always ask authors to start out by giving an elevator pitch for their book, and then you can elaborate if you'd like.
It's like one floor. There's 8 very different people at the tail end of World War II who come together to try and save Jane Austen's house.
Fair enough. Yeah. So while we're talking about having copies of this, I wanted to mention actually that we had custom Murder by the Book plates made, and we are lucky enough that Natalie is the first author who has signed them and shipped them back to us. So if you're interested in getting a copy of the book from Canada, and it's amazing given the international mail situation that we actually have them. Yeah. But if you are interested in getting a copy of the book, we have lots of book plates for you. I'm sorry, Maisie is joining us and she's getting a little squirmy, so I'm going to put her down for a second. So would you mind telling us a bit about yourself and what drew you to writing? Have you always been a writer?
I've always wanted to be a writer. There were long periods in my life where I did not write. I wrote most actively, I think, up through being young, 7, through my teens. Then went off to university and I studied English literature, but that was a precursor to going to law school. So the real bulk of my 20s was spent getting a law degree, becoming a corporate lawyer of all things at a blue chip firm up in Toronto. And when I was, I think about 30, I sat down, I left the practice of law and went into, I pivoted into sort of human resource within law firms and coaching and outplacement consulting. And I've been in recruiting. I've been doing that now for decades. And I had regained a bit of personal time because I was a lawyer during a tech boom in the mid 90s. So it was really busy. Yeah. And in regaining that personal time, when I turned 30, I said, okay, you got your time now, no excuses. write this book that you always said you want to be a writer. And I wrote that book and nobody cared. And then I wrote 4 more books in my 30s from 5 to 7 in the morning before my daughter went to school, and hundreds of people did not care. I have an Excel. My Excel, I call it my wall of silence. Like, so many agents around the world not caring, not getting back. So when I turned 40, you know, it was a time in life that it was like, you know, build something else, earn more money for your growing family, et cetera. And I started, you know, my own consulting business. And then in my late 40s, about 4 or 5 years ago, I wanted books to be a bigger part of my life. So I opened a little bookshop like you, but much smaller. And that was an incredible experience. So that's what I thought. I would tell people, McKenna, when they came in the store, and they'd be like, are you a writer? Are your books on the shelves? And I'd be like, oh, no, my books are not good enough for my store. But maybe I tried to write so that one day I could have a bookstore.
Yeah.
That's what I thought was the end of my story. And then 4 months after opening, my husband gets diagnosed with an incurable form of lung disease that's genetic. And he's stable right now on a melange of drugs, and he's doing well, and he's healthful, and he can golf, and he's hanging in there. And we bought ourselves time. We don't know how much, but as that happened, we had to make some hard decisions. And you know, the startup year, the first year of any business you're losing money and you're building, and we had to build and take down at the same time. That was very hard psychologically. We were under a lot of stress. Most people with my husband's disease, which is called IPF, pass away within 2 to 3 years of diagnosis. We were a young family at the time. Our daughter was 14. So we wanted to maximize time together. And to wrap up that part of my personal story about becoming a writer and always wanting to be a writer, I turned to Jane Austen during this time for solace, as I always have. And I threw myself into rereading her books in order. And then I read everything I could find about her. And then I took this trip to this village of Chawton, which is the main setting of my book. And I came back, and my husband started to kind of stabilize, and the doctors were like, ooh, maybe this isn't, you know, as like, maybe you have more time than we thought. And I got hope from that. And then about exactly 2 years ago, I sat down and I just looked at my family and I said, my elevator pitch. I went, you know what? I've been reading a lot about Jane Austen and a lot about old homes in England and rescuing old homes. And I've watched every second of Downton Abbey over and over again for the past year. And I'm going to write a book about a group of people that come together to save Jane Austen's house. And that's the story. Yeah.
Yeah. It seems like it was meant to be at a certain point, like that's what you were reading, and it came to be. So this may overlap a little, but Jane Austen, have you always been a huge fan? Clearly, this is a bit of a love story to her writing and the very real characters that she wrote about. Would you like to talk about how her and your experience with her books inspired this story? So you just mentioned that, but
No, of course. I mean, I love how you called it a love story. It is a Valentine to her. I mean, I think she's the great novelist in English literature, and I think she and Shakespeare are duking it out somewhere in heaven for, you know, best writer of all time. Jane Austen was someone that I discovered at a really wonderful age, about 9, because my parents had Pride and Prejudice in a box on the shelf with the ribbon that could mark its place. It was like old folio type books. And I was obsessed with the book in the box, and I would sneak it out. But one day when I was old enough, I started to read it. And if you've read the first chapter of Pride and Prejudice, it reads really fresh. It's very active. It's very dialogue heavy. You meet all the characters right away. You know who they are. Right away, you recognize these parents. So at the same time that I was falling in love with this book, there was I'm old. So we're not even talking Wet Shirt 1995, Colin Firth, Pride and Prejudice. We're talking 1980 BBC Masterpiece Theater. Mm-hmm. It comes on Sunday nights one summer. I think I'm 11 or 12. And I just was like, that was it. It was like a 1-2 punch visually and, you know, literary. I was like done. And so then I just spent my life like always enjoying her books, falling in love with Emma next, falling in love with Persuasion after that. And what I found was that no matter what stage of life I was in, I always got something from her writing. I always learned something about myself and about other people. I always got closure. I always got catharsis. I felt good reading them. I liked the happy endings. I liked the romance. I liked how I felt that she was sort of saying that we're all we're all the same and we're all a community. And I love how she talks about 3 or 4 families in a village. That's all these things are. You know, I'm writing them on a little piece of ivory. It's just 3 or 4 families in a village. Yeah. But her worlds are microcosms of the larger world because she's such a genius at characterization. She grabs people right away. You know them right away. And there's a lot more going on in those books as a result. And there's a lot about community support and about relationships with parents putting pressure on you, being authentic and true to yourself, and regret and loss and coming back from that. And I just find that as you go through these different life stages, you can always return to those themes.
Yeah, it's amazing that she's been able to do that. Like you said, at whatever point you are in life, you can relate to the characters in a different way. Absolutely. And in a real life experience. And I think you did that with your book. You've done a similar thing where where your characters all have these fully formed pasts. They all are very different, but you root for them all because at some point you can relate to all of them. So Jane Austen would be proud.
Well, thank you. I very much loved all my characters. And I remember as I was writing them that I didn't consciously necessarily pick specific ages, but I knew from the start that I wanted them to be split evenly between men and women. Mm-hmm. And I wanted this to be a book that men could enjoy. And one of the most gratifying aspects of the past few weeks, the book has now been out in the world for about a week and a half, has been the number of men contacting me, you know, through social media and stuff saying like, I did not think, you know, it's very pretty. And they're like calling it a total escape. And so I knew that it would be split between the genders and that there would be people from different occupational and socioeconomic backgrounds. And I also knew that there would be people from different age groups. And someone had asked me recently, you know, I have 3 characters that are in their late 40s, actually 4, I think. And someone said was, you know, why, you know, I'm so glad. Why so old? I'm so, you know, they were grateful. And I said, well, I'm older. So I wanted to explore coming at relationships and love and loss through middle age, when you look at things differently, more cynicism, maybe more pessimism. And I also wanted in my book, some of the characters to have survived both wars, because I wanted people to be dealing with really catastrophic loss. I thought my messages in my book about grief and how to move forward after trauma, McKenna, would be much more palatable and accessible to the reader if you really saw people who had gone through the ringer, you know. And it wasn't as simple as traumatic as it is. I'm an outplacement coach. It wasn't as simple as I lost my job or I broke up with somebody. It was, this is the worst kind of loss. This is the loss sometimes of multiple family members to war within a short period of time. And these people are very traumatized at the beginning of the book. And I wanted my overall message, I think, looking back, to be, if they could get through it, I could. And if they could get through it, the reader can. And that's really what I was going for.
Yeah, they also approach their relationships, especially one particular romantic relationship, with such caution and such, they want to be wary about not hurting themselves or hurting the other person. And it's really interesting, and the payoff is great. So so did you have an aha moment with the idea of this book, or did it build gradually?
It was an aha moment. It definitely was. To go back to the earlier question when you had asked me about wanting to be a writer, with this book, this is my 6th book. I had come back from my first Jane Austen Society meeting. For my 50th birthday, my daughter and I went down to Philadelphia, which is an awesome city, by the way, and Houston is next on my list, but Philadelphia was amazing. And they were all speaking about persuasion and the themes of grief and persuasion. And I came home, and the combination of the reading I had done, the trip to England, the secondary reading I was doing about Jane Austen's life, and this conference all seemed to coalesce one day. And I just remember, my daughter says to this day, she says, I remember you just like looked up and you said, oh, this is what I'm going to write about. Because I've been thinking about wanting to write again because I was feeling hopeful. And writing, being creative, for me, I do require a certain degree of freedom inside myself. And when people ask about this, you know, difficult time with COVID-19, I will explain to other writers, if they haven't gone through it before, is that not everybody responds to that kind of, day in, day out trauma and uncertainty that they're experiencing with a wanting to commit to the page and to explore. Sometimes you want to do that after you've gotten to a more new normal, you've stabilized a bit. So that's where I was when I got my aha moment, and I've never had more of a light bulb moment, and I'm so grateful for it.
That's fantastic. A little more in depth about the aha moment. Your characters all have such unique personalities and ages and all of that. When you were planning this out, were they modeled on any real life characters, historical or otherwise? And then also, did they come to your brain fully formed, or did you kind of plot them out?
No, they show up fully formed in doorways and on stone walls. They literally do. And the only thing I don't know right away about them when they show up, and I know this sounds very voodoo-ish, but is their facial features, their defined facial features. That stays fuzzy for some reason while I'm writing. It's never been an issue. I've heard other writers describe that. I wrote one page before I started this book, and it was 10 names: historian, teacher, doctor. And I just had their jobs written down. And when I decided to start typing, I didn't know who was going to show up and what their name would be or what they would be like as a person. So when I first started to type, I typed the Jane Austen Society, and I typed chapter 1, and I start typing, and the first image that comes to me is of a man lying on a stone wall, and he's very sad and lonely, and I don't know why yet. And I don't know anything about him. And I'm exploring this pain that he's in his head. And I'm relating to it because as I'm writing, I could remember that I had done the exact same thing. I'd lain on that same stone wall the previous fall on this trip that I had taken to Chawton. And so I'm really channeling my own emotions in that moment. Although as a writer, I'm never conscious of that. I always think I'm brilliant. I'm making it all up from scratch. So later I look back and I'm like, you're just like talking about your own life, kid. But on page 2, I knew something had to happen. And the stranger shows up, and it's going to turn out to be someone more famous in the book. But at the time, she's just this young woman from America. I wanted to have an American in it. I wanted it to be somebody like me, a tourist, showing up and not being able to find anything. And so she shows up, and I don't know what her name is going to be. I don't know that she's going to end up to be somebody more important in the book. And that's how I write. And it's a blast. So they all just show up. And I don't know who's going to befriend whom. I don't know who's going to fall in love with whom. So I actually fall in love with my characters as they're falling in love with each other. And there was this one scene where this couple's on a bench in the courtyard having tea. That was originally the first scene with this couple. And they're talking. And I picked up on this weird vibe of attraction between them. And I was like, ooh, age difference, socially inappropriate. It's Natalie and Emma's. And that was the first moment where I thought, oh, I could have fun with this. I could have parallels between my characters and Jane Austen's characters. And it wasn't intentional. So that made it even more fun for me as a writer.
That's amazing to me, because everything, the structure and everything in the book makes it seem like everything had to have been plotted out. I have another question, but I think you kind of just answered it, which is, do your characters dictate their activities, or do you plot it out? But it sounds like they took you on their journey.
Oh no, they completely are driving the bus. Like I'm not even on the bus for a ride. I'm like being pulled along with like tin cans on a string. And it's so much fun. And my husband's like, he said, like, when I'm writing the first draft, he's like, this is no talking to you. He's like, you're not even here. Cause I just want to be writing because I want to know what's going to happen next. And it's so much fun. And it's how I write. It's how I've always written. So I feel very lucky that somehow all those earlier manuscripts, McKenna, have built a muscle of resilience and of intuition as a writer. And what I would say to writers, sorry for jumping ahead here, but what I would say is that, all those many years of writing without a net gave me pleasure and fostered a skill. And now to know when I sit down and I write without a net that I actually can catch myself, that I actually do know kind of what I'm doing. I'm just not conscious of it. It's something I've sort of built more in my creative mind. That is an incredible feeling. It always makes it exciting for me to write as a result.
Well, and it also, I mean, people would say now you're an overnight success as an author, but clearly you're not an overnight success. You've been working hard at it a long time.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
I think it's really important. I did not appreciate this when I was meeting that wall of silence. I thought, this is it. I'm no good. Nobody cares about my writing. What's the point of doing this? And then when I sat down to write this book, McKenna, I had only 3 goals. And I said this to my husband. He remembers it. We were at breakfast one morning and I said, I'm going to write again, but I'm only going to write if, number 1, I love it. I have to love every minute of it. And I can tell you I did. I loved every second writing this book. And I hope it shows because I just had a blast. The second one, I wanted my husband to love it. But he's my first and often my only reader. And he loves what I write. And I think that's one of the things, I think you're very lucky when you have a partner, a very good friend, a CP, a spouse, somebody who, for whatever reason, likes the way your mind works. That's why you're friends. That's why you're married, you know. And so he likes my writing, even though I'm often writing about things that he's not necessarily, you know, interested in per se. And then the third thing I remember saying, though, about this book that I'd never said before was, it also has to have more than a snowball's chance in hell of being of interest to somebody outside this house. That was the Jane Austen hook. And, you know, this is one of the most difficult times in history for people, I think, generally, with no exaggeration, in terms of the size and the scope of what people around the world are coping with and struggling with. And it is a difficult time to be promoting a book and talking about a book, etc. But the one thing I would say is that I felt that Jane Austen kind of was waiting for me a little bit. Like when I was reading her, I was getting new stuff from reading her that I'd never gotten before. And now she kind of is jet fueling my book, you know, like she's the reason. I'm proud of my book, but she's who opened the door, and she's keeping the door wide open right now for me at a time when it is very difficult for anybody with a new book to get the response in the media that you need to get the attention to get people aware of it.
Yeah, well, I mean, the idea behind the book is frankly very commercial. Like, people love Jane Austen. A book tied into Jane Austen is always going to have some appeal because she has so many fans. But I think also the overall feel of the book and the heartwarming and the reassuring nature of it, and people going through hard things but coming out better in the end, or managing in the end, is a great thing for people to be reading right now. And I think that you're a little fortunate in the timing too, that people want a book like this. No one necessarily wants the most grim thing they can find right now to read.
I do feel that, I don't know that that's a coincidence either, because I wrote this book coming out of trauma, and to give myself distraction and comfort. And afterwards I can look back on my book and see that there's characters making choices or struggling with issues in my book. And at the time when I was writing it, I was not consciously processing the fact that I was engaging on a really deep emotional level with those same issues. And so the book helped me because, you know, 4 years ago, we're told we have to really, really worry about my husband's lungs. And we're told that we don't know what the next 2 or 3 years are going to look like, but they're probably going to be bad. And we were in a state of uncertainty and what is called anticipatory grief. And we still are. This disease has killed his mother and his aunt and other, you know, we're not Pollyannish. We're not saying, oh, we've dodged a bullet. Like we're still in it. What is sad for me, and also weirdly comforting, is that my book is coming out at a time when so many people are worried about the health of their loved ones, the health of people's lungs, just general trauma, anxiety, grief, uncertainty, pain. And so I feel like I got a little bit of a head start, unfortunately, on everyone. But my book that gave me solace, if it can help even just like one person right now without distraction, that's just a privilege in life.
Yeah, well, I'm sure it will, and it's wonderful that it's out there right now. And it sounds like it was a wonderful cathartic, almost therapeutic experience writing it now, reflecting back on that. If you're just tuning in with us, I know a lot of people come to these a few minutes late. We're talking with Natalie Jenner, the author of the Jane Austen Society. And if you're liking hearing about the book, she was gracious enough to sign some book plates for us. So all of our copies will come with a signed book plate. Also, if you have missed the beginning, on Facebook, you can tune in, or you can find the video about 15 minutes after this live. You'll be able to watch the whole thing in its entirety, or you can find it on our YouTube channel. We have a lot of questions about that and phone calls about how to watch these. So if you missed the beginning, check out our YouTube channel. I'll have it updated this evening. But back to you, Natalie. So are you writing now? Are you brainstorming? What are you working on?
So I did write another manuscript, and that's in with my agent, and it's sort of percolating. It's a very interesting time out there for all businesses. As I'm sure you're aware, everyone's having to pivot and really think deep about their mandate and what they're trying to communicate. So I decided after that book was done that I would try and take the month of May and take a break and enjoy having a debut book come out in the world. Yeah. So I'm itching to start what would be, I think, book 8, one book published. But I'll be starting a new book, another book of historical fiction, this one, sometime between now and July. So I'm excited about that. So it's just percolating right now. It's just one line in my head. Like, I don't know anything else yet. But.
Yeah. So we have a question from the comments, which I also have the same question, but we'll say Cindy asks, and this is inevitable, which Jane Austen book is your favorite?
Pride and Prejudice, because it was my first, and it is definitely, I think, her wittiest and her most accessible. I think that it's got pretty much a perfect plot, and it has, I think, probably the greatest heroine in all of literature in Elizabeth Bennet. So, but I put Emma a very close second. The more I read Emma, which I find interesting being a mystery store, is that Emma is considered by many academics to be the first detective novel. And so you can read it over and over again. And every time you read it, you will discover new clues in the voices of new characters, and you've never noticed it before. And in fact, there are Austen experts who have been saying to me, I had some of those aha moments about Emma, and I put them in my book. And a couple of them have come forward and said, "Oh, I've never made that connection." So that's not me, that's her. Like, she's so brilliant. You can just read that book for the rest of your life and not get to the bottom of what she's done. So it's a close second.
Okay. And which one would you recommend people to start on? Pride and Prejudice?
Pride and Prejudice, absolutely. I think Pride and Prejudice is definitely the best. Somebody calls it the gateway drug.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you already said that you visited Chawton, but do you have plans to go back, or have you visited any other Jane Austen landmark places?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very lucky. Having been born in England and have family, my entire paternal side of the family is over there. So we go back usually every year, and I have made many trips to Chawton. What was interesting was this was the first trip I ever got to make there on my own in about 30 years. And I think that was another reason I was so inspired while I was there. But I do go to Bath every time I go to England, which I love as well. And there's so much great Jane Austen history there. And I've also done literary pilgrimages to the site of Persuasion, Lyme Regis. And I haven't been to her original home in Hampshire, in Steventon, and I haven't been to Southampton, but I have been to most of the other places that have a connection to her. So it's really interesting. Chawton Library, Chawton House now, and the Jane Austen House Museum, which are the two landmarks in the village of Chawton, are, for me, the most important landmarks, because they are where she worked on and revised all 6 of her books. And they're also in the village where she spent the last decade of her life. And it is a village that, unlike Bath, as beautiful as Bath is and amazing, but it is a village of Chawton of 400 people still. And you step back into time, there's not much commerce. There's a pub and a tea room and a school, and a parking lot around the corner with like 800 buses. But other than that, when you're walking around, you really feel like you're there. And McKenna, I do think that's one of the reasons why with historical fiction, with my book, I really was able to sink into and try to capture the setting the way I did.
Right.
Because it really is undisturbed from change in the most wonderful, beautiful way.
That's wonderful. It reads like you were there, so that makes sense. Okay, so your bio, I think, still says that you own Archetype Books in Ontario, but I know that you no longer own it. Would you mind talking about that, or more specifically, how owning an independent bookstore informed what you were writing or the publication process?
That's a really great question, because it actually really did. And I don't know that I processed that at the time, but when I got the deal and started having to talk like this about what the heck I was doing while I was writing this book, I was made aware by thinking about my choices about historical fiction, for example, about how excited people in my store in the years I had it, 2015 to early 2017, when we closed Christmas Eve 2016. During that time, the biggest sellers in the store were often historical fiction. People were really crazy for these great, The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna, The Summer Before the War by Helen Simonson, and All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony Doerr. Like, there was a ton that year, and people were passing them around like hotcakes. And I think that experience, and I'll go back to talking about having a store in general, but that experience of seeing what people were responding to, but also processing how many books come out every week, because you know this, right? Like, people don't understand, it's thousands.
So many, yeah.
So many, and it's so hard to stay on top of. And it was the experience of having the store and seeing that made me not be so down on myself of not getting published. It was like, there's a lot of good stuff out there. And it's not a reflection of the quality of the writing. It's a reflection of the product getting attention in a crowded marketplace. So what the bookstore did was it helped me understand just what publishers were up against. And it, I think, made me less critical of the process and more understanding, which I think has also served me well with the publication journey. I think it's just made me more business minded. So in terms of having the store, it was an old jewelry store. It had 450 square feet behind a restaurant. It still had track lighting for displaying the jewels. And it had beautiful dark blue walls and beautiful flooring, dark, dusky gray. And I would look through the window for about 8 months. And I just feel like that would make a perfect bookstore. So all we really had to do, besides signage and order 1,000 books in a couple of weeks, was bring in a lot of these Billy bookcases from IKEA. And we just surrounded the store with them and got a couple of tables in the middle, and we were off to the races. And so it was a very incredible experience, because we didn't know what we were doing. And you're learning so much at the beginning, and you never stop learning. The thing about a bookstore is the reason people love them and love working in them and own them is there is nothing more fun than talking about books all day and interacting with people about books. Recommending books and having people come to you and go, oh, that was just what I needed. I remember one of my friends, a very busy lawyer, came in, and she's like, Little Paris Bookshop. And I had it was in paperback that year. And she took it home and she read it in like a day, and she like called me the next day and she's, I need more of that. I said, yeah, we all do. If we could bottle that book, we would be. But it was just wonderful when you saw people have that response. And so the bookstore, finally, to tie up your question, the bookstore also reinforced for me how when a book is coming out and it speaks to you in some way, either because it is the new Michael Connelly or the new Stephen King, or it's Rodham by Curtis Sinfeld, or it's the new Emma Straub, but then there's also content or topics. So in my case, when Eligible was coming out by Curtis Sinfeld, people were like, needed that book like anything, because they loved Jane Austen, and there was a new retelling of Pride and Prejudice. And so I could see the things that were really grabbing people's attention and really energizing them as buyers.
Right. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And it is 100% true what you said about being in the business of book selling gives you a greater appreciation of the business of publishing, because at the end of the day, it is a business. And as much as you want to be able to say every book should be published, or, there's the book has to be marketable. The book has to have an audience. So I'm so glad that this one's worked out so well for you, but it sounds like everything came together nicely. I do have a couple questions from the comments. So which film adaptation of Pride and Prejudice is your favorite?
There's no way to win and answer this question.
No, there's not.
Can I say what I like about them?
Yes, sure.
There's 4 to my mind. There's the 1941-ish, Greer Garson and Laurence Olivier, black and white, where everyone is wearing costumes straight out of MGM's Gone with the Wind. And it's not accurate stylistically, but I love the leads. The 1980 Pride and Prejudice that I fell in love with is very interior, stilted, typical older TV filming, but some of the actors in it blow me away. The actress that plays Elizabeth Garvey, and the couple, especially the gentleman playing Mr. Bennet. That's probably my favorite Mr. Bennet, my favorite Elizabeth, and those are 2 of my favorite characters in all of Jane Austen. I think the overall best one is the Colin Firth 1995 version for a lot of reasons, but you need time for this book. They really, really thoroughly captured every character, every moment. They gave everything oomph, and it's gorgeous to watch. And so I really love that. The movie I love as a movie. The Keira Knightley, 2004, 2005. I love it as a movie. I think it's stunning. I love the music. I love the cinematography. I love the actors. I especially love the 2 leads in that movie. But it's 2 hours. I mean, they had to cut out characters. They had to make hard choices. So I try not to judge it on that. So I think that visually it's the most beautiful.
It's Jane Austen light. For my money, it's the Colin Firth, but that's also probably when I was watching like and being introduced to Pride and Prejudice on screen.
Because you were like 5. How old were you?
I don't know. It was a while ago. So we have a question from Sharon. She asked, what is your opinion of Emma, the character herself?
Oh, that's a really good question. I have grown to love Emma. I'd say when I was younger, I had a bit of a love-hate relationship with her because she's kind of like, well, it's kind of like watching Gwyneth Paltrow in the movie, right? Like she's got everything and she's got the world on a string and she's not always treating people very well. And it's kind of like, okay, you need a bit of a come down, honey. And I was responding to Emma for Mr. Knightley, frankly, because I think he might be my favorite romantic hero in Austen. So I always was responding to that storyline. But as I've gotten older and I actually see how she was formed by the people around her, in particular losing her mother, obviously very young in life, and then having this hypochondriacal father who is really on edge, like he is really traumatized. I gain more as a mother too, myself of now someone at university. I gain more understanding and patience with the growing up that she still has to do, and not seeing her as less benignly than I did. Because I don't think I ever saw her as malignant in any way, but I didn't always gravitate towards her. And now I see her as somebody who does get better, does change, does grow up, and is going to be a good person in her community. And so, yeah.
Yeah, terrific. My last question, and in the normal interview part of this, is what have you read and loved recently?
Oh, I've been reading so many wonderful books by debuts, and I would have to really highlight for people Daughters of Smoke and Fire by Ava Homa. It is the first book in English published in history by a Kurdish woman, and it is a stunning family story and a thriller and a social dissection of what being displaced in your society. The story is not, it's not a true story, it's a novel, but the character is in Iran. It's an incredible story for humanity. And on a lighter note, I just ate up in a day to Haven to Hoax by Martha Waters, which is a Regency romance on steroids. It's amazing. It is so fun. And yeah, I'm always reading classics. So I'm always dipping into somebody from the late 1800s. And right now, E.M. Forster and F. Scott Fitzgerald, for some reason, I turn to them both as well when I'm wanting a little bit of solace from my reading and kind of calm prose. So
great. Speaking of the late 1800s, I always like to close my interviews with one-on-one authors with a few not too intrusive questions from the Proust questionnaire. So for those of you who don't know what that is, Marcel Proust came up with a set of questions to get to know people better at these parties and gatherings in the late 1800s and the 1880s. So there's about 30 questions, but I choose a few for each author. So which words or phrases do you most overuse?
Awesome.
Fair enough. I probably do also. This is I will qualify this with saying non-living as the answer. What is your most non-living treasured possession?
Probably my daughter's baby teeth.
Fair enough. Sentimental value.
Morbid. Yeah. You're a mystery store. So.
No, it's fine. It's fine. Every time I think of, well, you know what? That reminds me of is the spoiler for a book, so I won't say it. But anyway, your daughter's baby teeth. Okay. Where would you most like to live?
Right in the heart of Chianti, in the middle of Tuscany in Italy, the most beautiful place in the world.
That's a good choice. And what is your idea of perfect happiness?
I think just being at peace, being in the moment, able to feel and hear everything around me, whether I'm on my own or with my family, just feeling centered and, yeah, in the moment.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So that is all the questions I have for you today. So I'd like to say that, again, if you are interested in the book, we have copies of Jane Austen Society. We have signed book plates. As far as those of you wondering about the store status, we are still closed to the public, but we are just about to announce an appointment system. So stay tuned for that. I think we're talking to 24 authors virtually this month. So make sure to check out our newsletter, check out the Facebook events. We're adding more every day. I'd like to thank the folks at St. Martin's Press and your editor, Keith, and especially Natalie for helping set this up and joining us for this chat today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much. I had a blast, and thank you so much. Your store support of my debut book has been invaluable to me, and I've loved being here today.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure. Have a great evening.
Thank you, too.
Bye.